1979 to 81 was a period that saw a whole lot that was shiny and new in computing. The TI-99-4 and 4A were two of those shiny new toys, but one thing making a splash in the software world during this period was the emerging flight simulator genre. In 1979, Sublogic brought its flight simulator to the TRS-80 into the Apple II, and the genre would become one key measure of the progress of computer graphics over the next decade. Which does just make sense that flight, a pursuit that represents maybe more than anything else man's use of technology to strive against human limitations, would come to represent our striving against the limitations of computer virtualization. Anyway, nice as Sublogic's flight simulator was, we didn't see it on the TI-99 4A. So today I'm going to take a look at what we did see there. This is my history of the flight simulator genre on the TI-99 4A. Things really took off, and yeah, I might not be able to resist the flight puns here. Things really took off in the flight simulator genre on the TI-99 4A in 1982. 99er magazine has two things to tell us about in its first issues of 1982. In its initial issue, Not Polyoptics is advertising its simulator, Winging It, and in its second issue, John Dow is advertising his Dow 4 and Gazelle flight simulator. I'd first just like to point out that Winging It is the way cooler name of these two. But that aside, both are written in Console Basic and distributed on cassette, and both are instruments-only flight simulators. Dow 4, as you can see here, is very limited visually. It's a simulation in the strict sense that it expects the pilot to be able to use aeronautic instruments to fly, which, presumably pilots should be able to do. It promises an accurate simulation of flight wherein correct use of instruments is rewarded, presumably by not dying. Dow 4 was advertised in Flying magazine as not a game but a realistic IFR simulation. So it definitely needs to be approached with that understanding. While it was distributed on cassette, the manual provides directions for code modifications necessary to allow execution from a copy saved to disk. So that's much appreciated, and these worked fine for me. It might seem a bit barren, but it does what it claims to do, and an August 1985 MICROPENDIUM review of Dow 4 was largely positive. Sound and graphics are limited, but you at least get the roar of the engine, and you get a realistic simulation of flight. As I mentioned earlier, 1982 also gave us Not Polyoptics Winging It, likewise advertised in 99er's first issue of 82. Like Dow, it's a TI basic cassette game, but it offers a slightly richer set of instruments, with a semi-graphical ground map and weather map panel. Winging It would later get a disc version, announced in MICROPENDIUM in July 1985. But the fact that 3 years later that was noteworthy tells you how limited developments were during this period. As of MicroPendium's August 1985 review of Dow 4, these were still the only two products on offer to compare, and the article emphasizes that point. Fans of the flight sim genre might have been justified in feeling a bit disappointed with progress in this area at this point in TI-99 history. But in 1986, disappointment might well have turned to hope and excitement. The Triton Spring Catalog of '86 introduces a new product in 4A Flyer, showing off its 3D viewport and promoting its colorful graphics and sound effects. It seemed perhaps a TI flight simulator was on the horizon, which actually gave you a horizon to look at. Unfortunately, while that was more or less true, in May MicroPendium offered its assessment, and it was less than enthusiastic, declaring 4A Flyer not ready for takeoff. Where Dow 4 and Winging It were likely too much simulation and too little game for the average user, 4A Flyer seemed to be no simulation at all, but also not much of a game. John Phillips politely responded to the article's criticisms in a letter published the next issue, making some fair points about the limitations of the project. an 8K game written in 8 weeks, which is less a flight simulator in the strict sense, less a modeling of aeronautical physics and instruments, than, in his words, a simulation's simulation, which provides a flight sim experience for those who aren't worried about the details. Funnily enough, in the July issue which ensued, John Dow responded to 4A Flyer's negative review by echoing the article's criticisms and promoting a work in progress flight simulator of his own. But this project doesn't seem to have ever been released, so we'll perhaps never know what happened to that. In the end, I think I find myself sympathetic to 4A Flyer's case. It provides accessible and easy to understand objectives in the form of landing and shooting down enemies. Realism is certainly absent on all levels, and visuals are extremely simple, but as a flight simulation demo for general audiences rather than pilots, it provides simple and accessible goals. Granted, replayability is low, but I think if I had owned a 4A Flyer card at the time, I would have found it pretty neat. But let's set 4A Flyer behind us, since 1987 would be the year that took the TI-99 flight simulator to the next level. It began humbly enough in January with Bruce Hellstrom developing his BHXP-1 experimental aircraft, based on the Dow 4 simulator, but this time written in assembly and expanding on Dow 4's instruments-only model. However, that same month, MICROPENDIUM dropped a tantalizing rumor that Not Polyoptics, which had previously given us Winging It, would be bringing a new flight simulator written in assembly to market by February 1st. That title, Not Polyoptics' SPAD XIII Flight Simulator, would be MICROPENDIUM's March cover story and featured review. And it seemed that the happy middle ground between 4A Flyer's accessibility and the simulationist detail of Dow 4, Winging It, and BHXP-1 was finally available to the 99er looking to take flight. SPAD XIII got A's across the board, everywhere except ease of use, sort of inevitably for a flight simulator. The title appeared for purchase in the spring 1987 Triton catalog. And if SPAD XIII's release weren't enough good news, in September, MICROPENDIUM dropped word that on September 15th, Not Polyoptics would be releasing a big upgrade to the game, SPAD XIII Mark II, featuring some great new features. This version would add an external view of the plane from above and behind, better performance, new control and perspective selection options, and a new upgraded enemy in the form of the Red Baron. This version first appeared in the fall 1987 Triton catalog. 1988 would bring SPAD XIII's final iteration as Red Baron, a cartridge version of the game by Databiotics. Given the original's requirement for a disk drive, extended basic, and 32K, this is a welcome addition. This game is largely unchanged from the original, though Databiotics rebrands the title screen, of course, and somewhat disappointingly, your guns no longer produce a firing sound. But in general, this is a convenient way to play the game. So that's an overview of 1982 through 1988 in TI-99 4A flight sims. From their birth in instruments-only flight sims written in console BASIC, to the realization of the hope for a sim which would mix realistic flight simulation with attractive environment and plane graphics. SPAD XIII, in fulfilling that hope, makes a simulation a little more accessible by turning back the clock and giving us a World War I biplane, a SPAD XIII, rather than a more modern craft. If you play SPAD XIII or Red Baron, you'll definitely want to read the lengthy but well-written manual, as it's very necessary to understanding the mechanics of the game. Thanks for watching, folks. If you have any ideas on TI-99 4A games I should review, post them in the comments. By all means, suggestions are always welcome.